Welcome to From the White Pill Box, the podcast where we stomp on statism and find the white pills along the road to a stateless society. I'm your host, Mark Maresca. I'm the author of the Substack articles of the same name, From the White Pill Box, content specifically for the already red-pilled, libertarians, voluntarists, anarchists, people who've overcome the myth of statism or are close to it. It's easy for us to be black-pilled, to believe evil will win. That's where the white pill box comes in. There are real-world reasons to have hope. Let's get going. Greetings all. Thank you so much for listening today. This episode will be part 2 of my discussion about the myth of authority. My most previous episode was part 1. It aired on June 11th, 2024. I'll link to it, and I'd urge you, if you can, to listen to it before this one because it lays the groundwork. Still, in preparation for today's discussion, I'll summarize the points. The underlying root of the state is the myth of authority. That's the belief that it's right to have political leaders ruling the rest of us. Now, this is a false belief, like the belief in Santa Claus. The previous episode gave lots of detail showing how the myth of authority is false, inconsistent, and contradictory. This false belief has a direct cause and effect relation to the state. The myth is the cause, the state is the effect. How? Well, the belief assumes rulers are needed, are wanted. Thus, people go along with giving them resources and power. The state is the result. It's the belief itself that kicks off that causal sequence. Without it, the state can't get off the ground. I even define the state this way to put it in context. The state is the embodiment of the myth of authority. This makes clear the cause and effect connection from the myth to the state. I also discussed the libertarian movement's 50-year effort to abolish the state. I contrasted this with the abolition of slavery movement. That movement succeeded and amazingly only took about 40 years. A real contrast since, unfortunately, the liberty movement hasn't really put a dent in the state. Slave abolition managed to do something that libertarianism didn't. It identified the root issue, that slavery was simply immoral, an issue they attacked consistently and skillfully. But the freedom movement never correctly identified the root of the state as being the myth of authority. Or if it did, it wasn't made front and center. Anyway, our big misstep. Instead, we've shot at a target off-center all these decades. That's a summary of my last episode. Again, I'd urge you to listen to it for the full details. Now, this point about the belief in the legitimacy of political authority bears a lot of fruit. It leads to insights about how it psychologically impacts our thinking. It helps explain how the process of being red-pilled actually happens. It gives us perspective on libertarian strategy, which hasn't worked all that well, and ways it can help us do better. We can even get some insight into how the transition to a free society may look in the coming decades. And while it definitely dispenses some real black pills, it fortunately provides some real nice white pills, which this show is all about, of course. Today I'll discuss how the myth of authority so thoroughly infects us and the world around us. Let's start simple, with how it affects even our speech. Remember, statist indoctrination permeates the culture. It starts from childhood. It propagandizes us relentlessly from cradle to grave. Look at how we talk when we have almost any conversation that connects somehow to government. We tend to use the plural words. By that I mean we tend not to speak singularly as individuals, like I, me, you. Instead, it's words like we and our. Without even thinking, we should pass a law. We need better leaders. Our country, our president, our congressman, our mayor, our government. That's the myth at work. It makes us feel we're part of some club, this benign collective with leaders and followers. Like we're all on a big team with coaches at the top. Of course, that's not what it is. Those leaders have the power of a gun to force us, consent or not, and no opting out. Not very benign. but the myth obscures that. Then there's titles. Oh, we're in love with political titles. President this, senator that. All politicians have titles, just like in the military. But wait, in private employment, we don't think of our job title as formally part of our name. If the CEO or company president walks by, they're not addressed by title. But thanks to the myth, political titles insert an aura of nobility into our heads to further cloud our perception, to make them seem above the rest of us, so we more easily bow and obey. Then there's the government as a whole. For most people, the state seems like a living, breathing entity. They'll say the government should spend more on X, Y, or Z. The government should be paying us more for unemployment. Our minds are trained into thinking in vague, mushy ways like that. And it makes people feel they can't do anything about it, or it's not their responsibility. Anyway, it keeps them docile. And remember, the essence of the myth says the state has moral authority. So guess what? The state is seen as the good guys. So when we're judging anything the state does, the assumption is just that. They're good, or trying to do good, or expected to do good. So that even when we complain, we act bewildered. We wonder how they can screw things up so badly, since their goal must be to do good. Notice our assumptions there, that what they do is what you might expect. Help the poor, fix the roads, improve the economy, avoid nuclear war. We have the underlying assumption their goals are what common sense would dictate. But it's real easy to clear that misconception if we remember the state is caused by a myth. The myth that it's okay to give some men power over others. Power is what we give them. It should be no shock that their actions always ensure they keep that power, use that power, and of course, increase it. Their decisions make more sense when you remember they seek power, not human betterment. Admit it. We thought that before we woke up. We may even still have leftovers of that. Let's touch on the subject of how law, government law, messes with our head, thanks to the myth. So we imagine the state has legitimate authority, and so the rules it makes, the laws, must be legitimate, right? Now watch how it twists the mind. Here we go. What do we think of a person who defies the government's laws, not following the state's rules? We call them what? Criminal, immoral. Our minds are trained to look down at them instinctively, and it works. Admit it. When you know that someone has a record, what judgments materialize in your own mind? And it doesn't even make a difference what this rule breaker did. Even if it was a victimless crime, nobody actually got hurt, like caught with the wrong sort of substance. His taillight was busted, didn't report his income correctly. He's still seen as an immoral person, a criminal. Why? He broke the rules of the government, meaning he broke the rules of the myth. Now let's flip it. Think about the person who's obedient. He follows the government's rules. How is he perceived? Of course, good and noble. You've heard the expression, a proud, law-abiding citizen. I'll get right back to that phrase, but first let me give you a tip with slogans like that. Substitute the word myth into it. Because remember, the state is merely the effect. The myth of authority is the actual cause. So try to substitute the word myth like this. Instead of the proud, law-abiding citizen, they're the proud, myth-abiding citizen. Notice how that helps clarify the issue. That's what I mean by targeting the root. The proud, myth-abiding citizen puts their conscience on the shelf, then obeys strangers. Don't think, just follow rules someone else made. Sounds more like a robot. Turning off your mind and letting others do your thinking? Not exactly a reason to be proud. And that little trick I gave you, the substitution trick, mentally bookmark that. Train yourself to make that substitution when you talk about the state. I'll go through a neat list in an upcoming episode. Let's move on to how the myth makes us look at the enforcer of the law, the police. Well, he's a public servant we're supposed to respect and even thank. We're supposed to stop our car when he commands, do what he says, answer his questions, and better act subservient when you do it. Yet he actually says, you've heard it, I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. Okay, so you're also a robot, blindly following orders, not deciding for yourself. Real noble. In plain terms, the law enforcer is actually the myth enforcer. Another example, take people on a jury. They're expected to specifically not decide based on how they see right and wrong. They have to decide based on the law being the rules of the myth. And in case you didn't know, by the way, that's what the judge actually instructs them. Don't follow your own conscience, follow our rules. And what about the judge? He or she commands the authority of that courtroom. People speak when the judge says so, and punished if they're defiant. The judge is physically placed up higher than literally everyone else at a big, imposing desk. They get to bang a gavel to shut us up. The judge wears a robe like a high priest. If his job is important enough, his title changes from judge to justice. His very name literally becomes justice itself. The myth twists the brain in that kind of way. It makes us look at that and not think twice. Technically, not think even once. Now let me walk you through what is, sadly, an actual real-world scenario. Consider how the myth affects the way you think this through. Anyone would agree if someone busted your front door down and violently broke in and threatened you, it would be fair to defend yourself, right? No brainer. Hold on. Let's bring the myth into play so it can twist our thinking. The people breaking down the door are American soldiers. They're not here. They're in another country. They're in a regular neighborhood going stealth door to door looking for the evil guys, the ones that their leaders told them were evil. Remember, they're just following orders. As they bust into each house and terrorize family after family, what are we trained to think? The soldiers are the good guys, full stop. And what do we think of anyone they harm? Well, they're the bad guys, right? Thanks, myth of authority. Mission accomplished. Your thinking is twisted by the myth. Does it matter a child's been orphaned or killed? An innocent family's murdered? Nope. The myth tells us otherwise. Sorry, bad guys died, we did good. The myth says so. Okay, let's move from speech and thoughts to people's actions that result from the myth of authority. Think of the shameful spectacle of grown adults in the presence of a politician, like at a rally. Their eyes get wide in awe, as if they're seeing a religious figure or an accomplished athlete or movie star. They treat politicians with overflowing respect, like royalty. You've seen it. Another example. What do they do at the start of sporting events? They stand up and sing an anthem. It never occurs to anyone that when we see video of, say, North Korean communists singing an anthem, or newsreels of Germans from the Nazi era singing their anthems, we recoil. We judge those people as pretty much like cult members. But raise the domestic flag, out goes critical thinking, up goes the hand over the heart, or a snappy salute. Show them a picture of Mount Rushmore or any government monuments, and they swell with pride, all thanks to the myth. How about this one? Every couple of years, it's time to actually pick a leader, because the myth says so. Grown adults who in every other respect are independent, hold down jobs, raise families, work their butts off studying, etc., they walk behind a curtain and check a box next to a name. Someone they've never met and know very little about. Someone who speaks a smidge better than the other guy, or who's a smidge less disagreeable than the other guy. They pick this person to lead them, to make decisions for them, to make decisions for everyone. Yep, grown adults do that without an inkling of how embarrassing it looks objectively. In fact, they're proud of it. They walk out wearing an I voted sticker. In any other universe, you'd refer that person for some mental health counseling or a cult expert. And they try to shame you. Because if you're not part of the cult, meaning if you don't vote, they'll say you're not participating. Well, actually it's true. Voters are participating, all right? Participating in the myth. Now, let's talk about this really grim way the myth affects us. The myth is all about authority. Well, think about government schools, the public schools, K through 12. During the most important formative years of a human being's life, they're going to make sure you believe blind authority is a perfectly normal part of life. In school, authority is front and center. Literally, who's front and center of every class? And the class is almost always arranged in a strict grid, like a regiment. All day, you're expected to follow the rules. Each and every one of you. Look forward. Stay quiet. Stay still. Listen to the authority at the front. Obey them. Wait for the bell. Now you can get up. Arrive on time. Eat when you're told. Leave when you're permitted to. If you do need to leave outside the designated times, you need permission or a pass. Rules, rules, rules. Drilling into your mind deference to authority. Training you so, as adults, you obey their laws. The rules of the myth. Who are the good students? The ones who comply best, regurgitates the lesson, and never even thinks about challenging the teacher. Oh, and don't forget, every day starts with the pledge. What are we pledging? Allegiance. To what? The state, which means allegiance to the myth. Not sure about that? I checked the definition of allegiance. It's the loyalty of a subordinate to a superior. Speaking of public schools, you may recall one of the required reading novels was The Lord of the Flies. That was the fictional story of some boys marooned on an island. Despite trying to organize, eventually they descended into brutality and murder. That's a great example of how the myth infects culture. The public schools want to push the narrative that we can't govern ourselves. We need leaders with power over us. Otherwise, we descend into chaos, just like in the book, right? And we, as the students, all grow up assuming that's exactly what would happen in real life, right? Except it's false. In 1965, 6 teenagers actually did get marooned on an island. They worked together to survive in the real world, not the myth world. That's what actually happens. But the myth prevails. Okay, that's it. I hope I've been successful in showing how powerful the myth of authority is, how it so completely dominates our minds. Now, I won't deny, to ponder that is genuinely depressing, black pilling. But let me end with a white pill about that. That myth of authority is the root of the poisonous weed we call the state. Well, a weed can't survive without the root. As powerful as the myth is, it is, after all, hiding in our heads behind a fog. It needs that fog. Remember the Wizard of Oz? The most important thing keeping up his farce was that curtain. The myth of authority is like that. It needs the fog. To me, that's a white pill. That's real hope, that the fundamental strategy involves nothing more than clearing a fog. Pondering that definitely makes me more hopeful, and I'll be fleshing this out more in upcoming episodes. So, we'll end on that white pill for today. I hope you enjoyed this installment. Take care, and see you next time. Many thanks to Substack for hosting my podcast and my articles. And thanks especially to you for listening. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.